Montana Territory, summer of 1879. The sun had barely broken the edge of the Bitterroot Range when Victoria Langley pressed her back against the pine trunk, arms wrapped tight around her 5-year-old daughter, Elodie, breath held like a prayer. She had not meant to run, not at first. But when her husband's rage turned from shouting to fists, and finally to the small child cowering behind her skirts, something deep inside her snapped. She did not wait for dawn. She took her daughter, a sack of food and her father's old rifle, and she walked away from the house near Helena, never looking back. "Are we safe now, Mama?" Elodie whispered, her small fingers tangled in Victoria's shawl. "For now, baby," Victoria said, brushing a strand of golden hair from her daughter's face. "But we need to keep moving." They had been walking for 3 days through the woods, following the sun and the rivers, sleeping in hollows and under trees. The food was nearly gone. And Victoria knew eventually someone would come looking. Her husband was a wealthy man, and cruel men with money always had long arms, but under her fear was something else. A pull. A memory, half-formed, of a place her father once brought her as a child, a hidden valley he used to hunt in, far from anyone. "No one finds you there," he had said once with a tired smile. "It's like the Lord forgot to tell the rest of the world it exists." She had no map. But she remembered the direction. She remembered the ridge shaped like a sleeping dog and the river that turned like a hook just below it. If she could find that place again, she could start over. But she was not alone in the wilderness. 2 ridgelines west, a cowboy named Prescott Lanham tugged his bay mare to a stop, eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. Tracks, woman's boots small, child's shoes dragging in places, no wagon, no men's prints nearby. He climbed down and crouched, brushing his fingers across the dirt. Recent. Less than a day. Prescott did not usually involve himself in other folks' troubles. He had spent the better part of the last 5 years moving cattle south from Fort Benton, keeping to himself, keeping quiet. But something about those prints too small, too alone stuck in his gut. And if he was reading the landscape right, they were headed straight for that old valley his friend Elijah had told him about. Remote, beautiful, and dangerous if you did not know the land. He stood, adjusted his saddle, and swung back onto his horse. "Come on, Daisy," he murmured. "We got someone to find." By dusk, Victoria and Elodie reached the edge of a wide clearing. The air was cooler here, shadows long, and a thin stream wound through the grass like silver thread. "We'll stay here tonight," Victoria said, helping Elodie sit on a fallen log. Her daughter's cheeks were flushed, eyelids heavy. "Just for tonight." She gathered dry twigs and struck the flint. The flame caught, and within minutes she had a small fire going. She gave Elodie the last of the dried apples and chewed slowly on a piece of jerky, eyes scanning the trees. She did not hear the horse until it was too close to run. "Easy there," came a deep voice from the shadows. "Not here to hurt you." Victoria shot up, rifle in her hands, before she even saw him clearly. A man stepped into the firelight, hands raised, his face weathered but kind beneath the dust and stubble. His eyes were a quiet kind of blue, like the sky before a storm. "I'm alone," he said. "Name's Prescott Lanham. I saw your tracks. Figured someone might need help." "Keep walking," Victoria said, voice shaking but firm. "I do not need saving," he nodded once. "Fair, but your little one's got a limp and you are almost out of food." She hesitated. Elodie had not spoken since they'd stopped. She sat curled near the fire, arms around her knees, eyes wide. "I am not here to take you anywhere," Prescott said gently, "or ask questions you do not want to answer. Just thought maybe I could sit for a while, let my horse rest, maybe share some beans." Victoria's arms dropped a little. "You have food." He reached into his saddlebag and held up a small tin. "Enough to share." A long silence passed. Then Victoria stepped back and lowered the rifle. "Fine," she muttered. "But you stay on that side of the fire." "Deal." Prescott settled down, poured 2 helpings, and handed one to Victoria. She hesitated, then took it. The warmth of the beans hit her stomach like a blessing. She did not realize how cold she had been. "You heading somewhere?" he asked after a while, voice low. To a place my father once showed me, a valley. I think I remember the way. Prescott tilted his head. You mean the one near Sleeping Dog Ridge? Her eyes snapped up. You know it? Well enough. My friend Elijah used to trap there. No one goes unless they are trying to disappear. Victoria looked down at her daughter. That is the idea. Prescott watched her a moment, then nodded. I can help you find it. I do not need, I know, but I know the land and you do not. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Fine. Just to the valley, then we go our own way. He held her gaze for a beat. Understood. The next morning they broke camp. Elodie clung to her mother's side at first, but by midday she was riding on Prescott's horse, clutching the saddle horn while he walked beside them. Victoria kept her distance, arms crossed tight, but her eyes kept flicking to him. The way he spoke to Elodie, soft and patient. The way he knew which plants were safe, which paths would not twist back on themselves. The way his quiet presence made the fear in her chest loosen, just a little. That night, after Elodie had fallen asleep curled in a blanket, Victoria sat across from Prescott by the fire. You do not ask much, she said. He looked up. Not my business. But you wonder, he shrugged. Sure, but I figure you got your reasons. People do not run into the wild for nothing. Victoria stared into the flames. I could not let him hurt her. Prescott's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just reached over and stirred the fire. I used to think staying was safer, she whispered. That if I just waited long enough, he would stop, but he never did, and when he raised his hand to her. She trailed off, voice breaking. Prescott's voice was quiet. You did the right thing. She looked at him then, really looked. He was not handsome in the usual way. His face was lined, a little sun-worn, and his hands were rough, but his eyes were steady and kind. She had not seen kindness in a long time. You are not what I expected, she said. He gave a small grin. Most folks say that. She rubbed her hands together, unsure of what she felt, only that it was new and warm and terrifying. As the fire crackled between them, neither said another word. But something shifted in the silence. A fragile thread spun between two hearts that had forgotten what it meant to trust, and out in the darkness, the wilderness watched over them, quiet, vast, waiting. By the time they reached the high pass just below the ridgeline, shaped like a dog lying on its side, the wind had sharpened. It came off the peaks with a bite that cut through Victoria's thin shawl, and Elodie's cheeks turned ruddy with cold. The pine trees grew sparse at that elevation, giving way to alpine scrub and stone outcrops that made the horses cautious and the footing difficult. Prescott took the lead without asking, guiding Daisy up the narrow trail with a quiet assurance that left little room for hesitation. Elodie rode bundled in one of Prescott's old wool blankets, her head resting against the saddle horn, asleep despite the jostling. Victoria walked close behind, her boots slipping more than once on loose shale. She didn't complain. Her focus stayed on her daughter, her pace steady, her silence complete. At the crest, Prescott stopped and waited. Victoria caught up beside him, her breath visible in the thin air. What lay before them pulled her to a stop. Below, the land dipped into a bowl of green, ringed by high ridges and fed by a narrow stream that glinted in the sun. A stand of cottonwoods marked the stream's path, and willows clustered at its bends. Beyond the trees, a small meadow spread wide, scattered with wildflowers even this late in the summer. And further still, near the valley's edge, a half-collapsed log cabin leaned into the hill, its chimney still standing, its roof sagged but intact. "That's it?" Prescott asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded slowly. "It's more than I hoped." They made their descent carefully, Victoria carrying Elodie in her arms when the slope grew too steep for the horse. Prescott led both animals with quiet care, his voice low and steady when he spoke to them, like someone who'd spent more time with beasts than with people. The sun was already behind the ridge when they reached the cabin. Up close, it showed its years lichen on the logs, rust on the hinges, and a door that hung sideways on one hinge. But the walls still stood, and the floor inside was dry. That was all Victoria needed. Prescott didn't wait for an invitation. He eased his shoulder under the door and lifted it enough to prop it open with a flat stone. Inside, dust clung to everything, and a bird's nest filled the corner of what had once been a fireplace. Still, the place smelled of old wood and time, not rot. "I'll take the lean-to," he said, nodding toward the collapsed shed beside the cabin. "You'll need this space." Victoria lowered Elodie onto the pallet of pine boughs she'd laid out near the hearth. "There's room enough for you in here once she's asleep." Prescott paused, one hand on the doorframe. "You sure?" She didn't look up. "I wouldn't say it if I weren't." He stepped inside at dusk, pulling the door closed behind him with care. The fire crackled low in the hearth now, coaxed from the old ashes he'd found beneath the stones and fed with split limbs from a fallen spruce. Victoria sat with her knees drawn up, the hem of her dress smudged from the trail. Her hair had come loose, and she didn't bother fixing it. Prescott leaned against the far wall, arms crossed. "That man you ran from, he'll send someone." "I expect so," she said, her voice quiet. "He won't come himself. He doesn't like getting his boots dirty." Prescott's jaw moved once before he spoke. "You think he'll reach this far?" "He's paid men to do worse." He nodded once. "Then we'll make it look like you kept going west. I'll lay false tracks come morning, burn a few things, leave a trailhead near the river bend." "They'll follow that." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her face softened. "You think of everything?" "I've had to." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. Later, when Elodie was asleep and the fire had burned down to its glow, Victoria stood and gathered a strip of cloth, darning needle tucked in her palm. She sat beside Prescott with a quiet resolve and began patching a tear in his shirt. He watched her fingers move, the lamp casting long shadows across her knuckles. "You don't need to do that." "I know," she said simply, "but it needs mending." He didn't stop her. Outside, the wind made the trees whisper, and inside, the silence stretched between them, not empty but full of something just beginning to form. After a while, Prescott said, "You ever think about staying here, not just for hiding?" She didn't answer right away. The needle paused mid-stitch. "I haven't had a place that belonged to me since I was a girl. This one could." She looked up. "You'd help me build it back if you'd let me." Victoria folded the cloth, her fingers still. "I don't know how to trust what's safe, not anymore." Prescott didn't move. "You don't have to rush. Just don't shut the door before you're sure." She tucked the needle away and stood. "Good night, Prescott." He rose as well, his frame casting a long shadow across the wall. "Sleep easy, Victoria." She didn't speak again, but her eyes lingered on him for a breath longer than they needed to. Outside, the stars blinked through the high branches. Inside, the fire breathed low. And though nothing had been promised, something unspoken had begun to take root, quiet, steady, and strong as the land that surrounded them. The wind settled after the third day, and the valley began to breathe in its own rhythm again. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, and long violet dusks that stretched the shadows of the cottonwoods across the meadow like reaching arms. The cabin, once hollow and still, now held the steady sound of a child's laughter, the scrape of tools against timber, and the low murmur of grown-up voices working side by side. Victoria had found the root cellar buried beneath a drift of pine needles and collapsed boards. Prescott helped her clear it, hauling out broken shelves and nesting mice, and by midday they'd made it usable again. She stood at the edge of the opening, hair tied back with a strip of muslin, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. "You ever kept food in the ground?" she asked, brushing her hands on her skirt. "Only when I didn't want it stolen," Prescott said, lifting out the last rotted crate. "But I reckon you're planning more than jerky and hardtack." "I am. I found wild onion near the stream and gooseberry. If it keeps growing like this, I'll try my hand at jam." "You sound like someone planning to stay." Victoria squinted into the sun, then glanced down at where Elodie played in the tall grass, trying to braid a crown of daisies. "I think I might be." Prescott didn't smile, but something eased in his shoulders. He reached for the shovel again. Then we'll need to shore up the south wall of the cabin before snow hits. That beams bowed near clean through. They worked until the light shifted golden and long across the valley floor. Prescott kept to the heavier lifting, hoisting stones and cutting new timber from fallen trees. Victoria took to the hearth, scrubbing soot from the flue, and setting the iron kettle she'd found near the stream to boil. That evening, after Elodie had fallen asleep with pine needles tangled in her curls, Victoria stepped out onto the small stoop she and Prescott had rebuilt from scavenged planks. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage. Prescott sat a few feet away, knife in hand, shaping a length of ashwood into something narrow and straight. "What is that?" she asked. "Arrow shaft," he said without looking up. "Just a habit. You hunt with a bow, when I don't want noise." She crossed her arms, leaning her shoulder against the post. "You served somewhere, didn't you?" He paused mid-carve, then set the knife down slow. "Missouri Cavalry." "I was 19. She said nothing for a time, only watched the stars begin to blink into place above the ridge. Then, "Did you leave on your own?" "No, Army left me first. I came back to nothing. Folks gone, land sold. I took to working drives just to keep walking." Victoria sat on the stoop, her knees drawn up beneath her skirt. "You ever think about what you'd do if you stopped walking?" He looked at her then, eyes steady in the dark. "Not until lately." She didn't flinch from it. "I used to think I was meant to live quiet behind a man's shadow, that if I kept my voice down, kept the house clean, nothing would break." He didn't speak, but he listened. Every part of him did. "I was wrong," she said. "Things break anyway, people too, but out here." She looked toward the dark line of trees at the edge of the clearing. "Out here, I don't feel small." Prescott picked up the arrow shaft again, turning it in his hand. "You're not." She looked down at her hands, calloused now, dirt beneath the nails. She didn't mind it. "You're not who I expected either," she said after a moment. "Most folks never look long enough to see past the dust." "I did. I know." The silence between them thickened but didn't press. It held something instead. A question neither had asked, but both were circling. Victoria stood and stepped inside. When she returned, she held something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to him. He unwrapped it carefully, a slice of cornbread warm and crumbling with wild honey drizzled over the top. "Where'd you get the cornmeal?" he asked. "Traded with a trapper who passed through yesterday. He had a sack half full, said he'd take the last of our salt pork for it." Prescott took a bite. He chewed slowly, eyes closing for a moment. "Best thing I've eaten in 5 years." Victoria sat beside him again, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I figured if I'm going to stay, I ought to feed the help. You planning to keep me on? If you don't mind split chimneys and wild onion stew. I've lived worse." They didn't speak again that night, but when they stood to head inside, she didn't let the door close between them. And when the fire inside burned low and the wind picked up again, it carried no fear with it. Only the sound of a woman and a man learning the shape of peace. In the days that followed, Prescott cleared a patch of earth near the stream, fencing it with deadfall and brush. Victoria planted what seeds she had, mostly late beans and carrots, and marked rows with sticks. Elodie helped, dragging a twig through the soil with great ceremony. They found a rhythm. Mornings filled with work, afternoons with quiet lessons, evenings with shared meals and small, steady company. And though no promises had been made and no words had been spoken beyond what each day required, something deeper was being built slow, sure, and rooted in the kind of trust that doesn't come fast, but holds strong once it takes. Prescott never asked about the past again. Victoria never offered. But each time their hands brushed passing a tool, steadying a beam, lifting Elodie down from the horse, it left something behind. A question answered without being asked, and when night came and the valley grew still, neither one of them felt alone. By late August, the valley held a different kind of stillness, the kind that settles once you've stopped waiting for the worst. The tall grass had begun to yellow, and the wildflowers had thinned, but the stream still ran clear, and the mornings, though cooler, came without frost. Victoria stood barefoot in the shallow water, skirts tied at her knees, hands stained from rinsing the purple skins off a basket of late-plucked chokecherries. Prescott sat a few yards away, mending the leather cinch from Daisy's saddle. The sun was warm across his shoulders, and the scent of wood ash and wet stone drifted up from the water. Elodie was farther upstream, wedged between two flat rocks, humming to herself as she lined up bits of quartz she'd gathered. "You ever think about what you do different?" Victoria asked without looking up. Prescott didn't answer at first. He pulled the strap taut and tested the stitching with his thumb. "Only now that I've got something worth the wondering." She wrung out the cloth she'd used to carry the fruit and set it on a rock to dry. "I used to think I'd open a shop in town," she said. "Sewing or hat making, keep a ledger, have a window to sit by. I thought if I worked hard enough, it'd earn me good treatment." He set the strap down slowly. "Did it?" "No." The water slipped around her ankles. "But I think I might have been chasing the wrong kind of peace." Prescott squinted toward the tree line where a pair of mule deer had appeared, necks long and alert. "Maybe peace don't live in towns." Victoria knelt beside the basket, fingering the smooth stones along the bottom of the stream bed. "It doesn't live in shame either." He looked at her then, not startled, just quiet. "I didn't leave him soon because I thought that made me weak," she said, "but staying broke more of me than leaving ever did." Prescott stood and crossed to where she knelt. He crouched beside her, hands on his knees, eyes level with hers. "You're not broken now. I'm still not whole. You don't have to be." She met his gaze, steady this time. "And you, what would you have done different?" he thought for a long moment. "I'd have written to my sister. After the war, told her I was alive. I didn't. Thought maybe she was better off not knowing." Victoria's brow furrowed, but she didn't press. "You still think that?" "No." She turned back to the water. "You ever think of writing to find her? I might one day." He straightened and offered her a hand. "But not yet." She took it, her fingers wet and cold against his calloused palm. "Because of me. Because I want to see this through." That night the storm came in fast from the west. The wind hit the cabin just after sundown, sweeping down the ridge like a warning. Victoria and Prescott worked quickly to lash the shutters closed, stacking the last of the firewood against the inside wall while Elodie sat tucked beneath the quilts, eyes wide with worry. "We'll be fine," Prescott said as he secured the latch on the shutter. "Logs are tight, roof sound. Let it blow." The rain came in sheets, hammering the roof and running down between the boards. Victoria lit the lantern and set it low near the hearth while Prescott stoked the fire higher. The room glowed gold and soft, the shadows dancing across the beams. Elodie crawled into her mother's lap and Victoria wrapped her arms around the girl without a word. Prescott sat across from them, his knees drawn up, eyes soft in the lantern light. "You always this calm?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above the wind's whistle. He shook his head. "No, but I've ridden through worse." She studied him. "I think you carry more than you let on." He met her eyes. "I think you see more than most folks want noticed." She reached for the kettle, poured hot water into the tin mug beside her. "I see a man who doesn't run from hard things." Prescott glanced toward the fire. "I used to. But not now." "No." Elodie stirred against her. "Mama, will the roof hold?" Victoria kissed her temple. "Yes, baby, it's built strong." Prescott leaned forward. "And if it doesn't, we'll fix it, like everything else." It wasn't a promise of safety. It was something better, steady, willing, true. After the storm passed, the air turned cold enough to hint at the first breath of autumn. The trees along the creek began to yellow at their tips, and the sky in the mornings came in sharp and clear. One morning, Victoria found Prescott splitting kindling near the edge of the clearing. She watched him for a moment before calling out. "There's a letter," she said, "in my trunk, for the circuit judge in Helena. I wrote it weeks ago but didn't know what to do with it." He set down the axe. "You want me to take it?" She shook her head. "No, I want you to read it." He hesitated. "You sure?" "I need someone to know what happened, and I trust you." He took the folded paper with both hands and sat on the stoop to read. When he finished, he looked up at her. "I'll write it out, deliver it myself." "I thought you didn't plan on leaving yet." "I'm not leaving," he said. "Just making sure what you built here doesn't get taken." Victoria stepped down beside him. "Prescott, I won't be gone long. 3 days there, 3 back. Maybe less if the river crossing's still shallow." She studied his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes, the quiet certainty in his voice. "You always do what you say," he nodded once. "Always." She reached for his hand, fingers cool against his. "Then come back," he squeezed gently. "I will." And when he rode out at first light the next morning, Victoria stood at the edge of the clearing, Elodie beside her, watching his figure grow smaller against the rising sun. Her heart didn't panic the way it once would have. It waited, steady, certain now of something it had never known before. He would come back. Because he had found in her what he didn't know he'd been searching for. And she had found in him the map to something she'd stopped believing existed, a life built not on fear, but on the quiet strength of choosing one another, day by day. Prescott returned on the 6th morning, just as the dew lifted from the grass, and the frost hadn't yet seeped into the earth. Victoria spotted Daisy's ears first, bobbing just above the rise near the creek bend, and she stepped out from the root cellar with her apron still tied around her waist. Elodie, brushing flour from her hands, dashed out behind her, feet bare, cheeks bright with the cold. He dismounted slowly, boots dragging through the brittle grass, and handed Victoria a folded envelope. They filed it, quietly. "Judge signed off, and there's nothing tying you to him now, not legally. Not by name, he won't be able to reach this place." She didn't speak right away. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the paper, but her voice held. "Did they ask questions?" "Some. I answered what I had to." He looked at her then, not with caution, but with certainty. "You're free, Victoria." Elodie wrapped her arms around his waist in a sudden, wordless hug. Prescott glanced down, unsure what to do with his hands, and rested one gently on the back of her head. "Missed you too, little one." Inside, Victoria set the envelope in a wooden box beneath the floorboard. She didn't dwell on it. What mattered now wasn't ink or signatures. It was the wood smoke in the chimney, the warm bread rising on the hearth, and the man outside stacking the last load of firewood like he already belonged to the place. Later that week, Victoria stood barefoot in the cottonwood grove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands tangled in the bark of a sapling she was trimming back. Prescott joined her, a woven basket over his arm filled with soil-stained carrots. "I passed an old claim marker a mile southwest," he said. "Looked abandoned, cabin's gone, but the well's still there, spring-fed clean." She straightened slowly, brushing a leaf from her brow. "Is it close enough for a field?" "Flat stretch just beyond it. Soil's darker too." "Richer?" She wiped her palms on her skirt. "You thinking of planting wheat?" "Maybe. Corn too, if we can fence it. Could run a line of beans up that fence you mended." She stepped closer, the cottonwood leaves rustling above them. "You talk like a man who plans to stay." "I do." They stood a long moment in the hush of the grove, the scent of damp earth and pine thick in the air. Then she asked, "What would make you sure?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "You. If you want me here, that's enough." She didn't answer with words. She reached out and placed her fingers against his cheek, her thumb tracing the edge of his jaw. His hand came up slowly, covering hers. Neither moved away. That night, after Elodie had fallen asleep beneath the quilt Victoria's mother had pieced long ago from scraps of her wedding dress, Victoria stepped outside. The moon hung low, full and pale over the ridge, and the valley shimmered silver. Prescott stood near the fence line, arms resting against the top rail, hat slung low on his back. She joined him without a word, her shawl wrapped loose around her shoulders. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I spent a long time thinking I'd never belong anywhere again. I thought the war burned away whatever part of me could settle." She kept her gaze on the moonlight dancing along the stream. "I thought surviving meant staying hidden, that love was too costly." He turned then, so close she could see the line of worry between his brows. I don't want to pass through this place. You're not, she said softly. He reached for her hand this time. I'd build this life with you if that's what you want, she nodded, tears not of sorrow but of something long held finally breaking free. I want this. All of it. They married in the clearing behind the cabin 5 days later, with Elodie standing between them holding a bouquet of late blooming asters. The trapper who'd traded the cornmeal served as witness, and Victoria wore her mother's brooch pinned at her collar. There was no preacher, but the vows were spoken with such honesty and quiet strength that the cottonwoods themselves seemed to lean in and listen. The days that followed found them not in grand gestures but in the steady weaving of a life, preparing the ground for spring, sealing the cabin tight for winter, teaching Elodie her letters by lamplight. Prescott carved her a new stool for churning, and Victoria stitched him a shirt from the last of her linen. They fit together not by chance, but by choice made again each morning, each dusk, each long winter night. Years passed, but the rhythm never broke. In time, a second child's cry joined the valley's quiet music, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's quiet stare. Elodie grew tall and sure, her hands calloused from work but her voice full of songs that echoed through the trees. They never left the valley. They didn't need to. The world outside kept spinning, but inside their hollow of mountains and pine, they built something stronger than fear, deeper than silence. Victoria never again felt small. Prescott never again drifted. And when the wind came down off the ridge each autumn, it found them still there, side by side, hearts steady as the land beneath their feet.